The gods were returning, and humanity had built an armada to kill them. Admiral Kira Voss stood on the bridge of the Eternal Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command rail as she stared into the impossible sight before her. Stretching across 3 star systems, 500,000 warships hung in perfect formation like a metallic constellation against the black void. Each vessel bore the scars of humanity's desperate journey to this moment, hastily welded armor plating, jury-rigged weapon systems, and hull markings from a dozen different conflicts. Final count confirmed, Admiral, her tactical officer reported, his voice barely steady. 500,000 vessels operational. From Earth's ancient dreadnoughts to the Martian mining barges we converted last week. Every ship that can fly, every gun that can fire. Kira nodded, though her chest felt hollow. She had spent 30 years in the fleet, fought pirates and rebels, witnessed the beauty and horror of deep space. Nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing could have. Incoming transmission from Earth Command, the communications officer announced. The main screen flickered to life, revealing President Chen's haggard face. Behind her, through the reinforced windows of the emergency bunker, the skies of Earth flickered with unnatural auroras, reality itself beginning to fray. Admiral Voss, Chen's voice cracked with exhaustion, the anomalies are spreading faster. We've lost contact with the Proxima colonies. The Tau Ceti system, it's just gone. Vanished from all sensors as if it never existed. Kira felt ice in her veins. 12 billion souls in Tau Ceti, erased from existence. Understood, Madam President. We're moving to intercept. Chen's eyes glistened. Admiral, if this fails, it won't, Kira lied smoothly. But if we don't return, remember us not as soldiers, but as the generation that refused to kneel. The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge, broken only by the hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of 500,000 engines preparing for the impossible. It had begun 6 months ago with Dr. Elena Martinez's discovery on Kepler 442b. The archaeological team had been excavating ruins of a civilization that predated known galactic history by millions of years. Elena, brilliant and obsessive, had spent weeks deciphering the hieroglyphs carved into walls of some impossible metal that seemed to absorb light. The message, when finally translated, had chilled humanity to its core: we built weapons to cage the gods. The prison weakens. When the stars dance wrong, they will wake. Prepare your children's children's children, for mortals were never meant to face what sleeps between the atoms of reality. Elena had dismissed it as mythology until the energy readings began. Dimensional distortions appearing at the edge of known space, growing stronger each day. Then came the disappearances, entire star systems blinking out of existence, leaving behind only empty void where billions of lives had once thrived. The global response had been unprecedented. Every nation, every corporation, every military force in human space had contributed to the largest fleet ever assembled. Battleships from the Earth-Mars war were pulled from museums and retrofitted. Cargo haulers were armed with plasma cannons. Even luxury yachts were equipped with torpedo tubes and pressed into service. But it wasn't enough. Kira knew it, her officers knew it, and deep down, every soul in the Armada knew it. They were sailing into myth itself, armed with steel and determination against forces that had shaped the cosmos before Earth's sun was born. Admiral, the sensor officer's voice was tight with fear, we're detecting massive spatial distortions dead ahead. It's like space itself is tearing open. Kira moved to the tactical display, watching as her instruments tried to make sense of the impossible. Reality was unraveling in a sphere 50 light-years across, and from within that chaos, something ancient stirred. The first entity emerged like a wound in the fabric of existence itself. It had no fixed form, sometimes appearing as a geometric impossibility of angles that hurt to perceive, other times as a writhing mass of what might have been flesh or might have been folded spacetime. When it spoke, reality itself conveyed its words, bypassing sound entirely to resonate directly in the minds of every human in the fleet. Small flames flicker in the dark. You should not have woken us. The voice carried the weight of eons, the casual dismissal of a cosmic force acknowledging insects that had somehow learned to speak. Around the entity, space bent and twisted. Stars aged millions of years in seconds, blooming into red giants before collapsing into white dwarfs. Planets formed from cosmic dust, developed life, watched civilizations rise and fall, then crumbled to nothing, all in the span of heartbeats. All ships, Kira commanded, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat, weapons free. Target the anomaly and fire. 500,000 warships opened fire simultaneously. The combined firepower could have shattered continents, boiled oceans, turned entire moons to vapor. Particle beams, nuclear missiles, plasma cannons, kinetic rounds traveling at relativistic speeds, humanity's most devastating weapons unleashed in perfect coordination. The barrage struck the entity and simply stopped. Energy weapons bent away at impossible angles. Physical projectiles aged to dust before contact. Nuclear warheads detonated harmlessly, their fusion fires snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. Amusing. Your species builds such crude toys. The entity gestured, or perhaps thought, and 10,000 ships in the forward line simply ceased. Not destroyed, not vaporized. They became nothing, as if they had never existed. The crews, the metal, the very atoms that composed them were retroactively edited from reality itself. Kira's hands trembled as she watched 10,000 dots vanish from her tactical display. 50 million souls, gone without even the dignity of death. Admiral. Elena Martinez's voice crackled over the communication system from her research vessel buried deep in the fleet's protective formation. I found something in the ancient records, weapon specifications. They built devices called reality anchors, machines that lock the laws of physics in place. Hope flared in Kira's chest. Can we build them? Already am. But it'll take time to retrofit the entire fleet, and we need to. Her words were cut off as space twisted again. Two more entities emerged from the dimensional rift, each as impossibly vast and terrible as the first. One resembled a living nebula of stars and void, constantly consuming and birthing galaxies within its form. The other was geometric perfection taken to its logical extreme, every angle precisely calculated to cause maximum psychological trauma to any consciousness that perceived it. 3 of U.S. Wake, the original entity intoned. Sufficient to remake this tedious reality. The game grows stale after so many eons. Shall we begin with the bright spiral? Asked the star entity, gesturing toward the Milky Way. I hunger for its core. Kira realized with dawning horror what they were witnessing. These weren't aliens, weren't even beings in any sense humanity could comprehend. They were the architects of reality itself, cosmic forces that had grown bored with their creation and now sought to reshape it for their amusement. The ancient civilizations Elena had discovered, they hadn't been conquered or destroyed. They had been the previous players in this cosmic game, discarded when the entertainment value diminished. All ships, fall back to defensive formation Delta 7. Kira commanded. Dr. Martinez, how long do you need? 6 hours minimum to upgrade the core systems, then, another gesture from the geometric entity. 50,000 ships aged backwards, their crews becoming children, then infants, then nothing as they dissolved into component atoms. The vessels themselves grew primitive, advanced technology reverting to steel and chemical rockets before crumbling entirely. We don't have 6 hours, Kira whispered. Then she felt it, a strange tingling in her neural implants, the command interface that linked her to the fleet's tactical network. Elena's voice echoed in her mind, but not through the communication system. Kira, I'm uploading the anchor protocols directly to your command matrix. But there's something else, something the ancients discovered. The entities aren't truly gods. They're parasites, feeding on the quantum uncertainty that makes reality possible. If we can create a stable enough field, the connection cut as another wave of temporal distortion swept through the fleet. When it passed, another 100,000 ships had simply stopped existing. Kira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of command, the responsibility for 400,000 remaining vessels and the crews who trusted her to lead them against the impossible. In her mind, she could sense the new protocols spreading through the fleet's network, reality anchors coming online one by one. But she could sense something else too, a deeper connection forming between the ships, their crews, their very consciousness beginning to merge through the quantum entanglement fields of the anchor systems. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "the anchor network is establishing coherence, but it's doing something to us. I can feel everyone. Every ship, every crew member. We're becoming something new," Kira finished, understanding flooding through her as 500,000 minds touched hers. She was no longer just Admiral Kira Voss. She was the collective will of humanity's final stand, the Gestalt consciousness of 500,000 crews who had chosen to face annihilation rather than surrender. "Interesting," observed the original entity. "The small flames learn to burn brighter. But light cannot exist without darkness to define it." The three cosmic forces moved with purpose now, no longer toying with their prey. Reality warped around them as they prepared to reshape the local galactic cluster, to transform every star, every world, every possibility into their new playground. But humanity's fleet was changing too. The reality anchors weren't just stabilizing physics, they were evolving it, creating new laws, new possibilities. Ships began to merge and separate at will, their crews existing simultaneously as individuals and as facets of a greater whole. The Eternal Defiance itself grew, incorporating nearby vessels into its structure until it became something beyond any designer's imagination. Kira felt herself dispersing across the network even as she remained anchored to her original body. She was in every gun turret, every engine room, every bridge across the transformed fleet. And through 500,000 pairs of eyes, she saw the truth. The entities weren't unbeatable. They were powerful, ancient, terrible, but they were also limited by their own nature. They fed on chaos, on uncertainty, on the gaps between what was and what could be. The reality anchors weren't just protecting humanity's fleet, they were starving the cosmic parasites. "Now," she whispered across the network, her voice echoing through 500,000 souls. "Show them what mortals become when they refuse to die." The evolved fleet struck not with weapons, but with pure, crystallized intention. They didn't fire energy beams, they rewrote the fundamental constants that governed energy itself. They didn't launch missiles, they created pockets of absolute physical law that spread like infection through the entity's chaos-based forms. The first entity, the one that had spoken with such casual dismissal, suddenly found itself trapped within rigidly defined parameters. Its form, no longer able to shift between dimensions, solidified into something almost comprehensible, a vast, writhing mass of dark matter and negative energy, screaming across every electromagnetic frequency as it experienced limitation for the first time in eons. "Impossible. We are the authors of possibility itself." "Not anymore," Kira replied, her consciousness distributed across the fleet but her will focused like a laser. "Today, the author become the authors." The battle that followed could not be described in conventional terms. It was fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with the laws of physics themselves as weapons. The geometric entity tried to trap the human fleet in a maze of impossible angles, only to find its perfect mathematics corrupted by the stubborn irrationality of mortal hope. The star entity attempted to age the fleet's crews to dust, but encountered consciousnesses that existed partially outside linear time. Ships were lost, hundreds of thousands of them, but each destruction only made the remaining fleet stronger, more unified, more impossibly determined. The crews that died didn't truly perish, they became part of the greater whole, their memories and experiences adding to the collective strength. Elena Martinez, her research vessel long since integrated into the core network, had become something like a living library of ancient knowledge and human innovation. Through her, the fleet learned to speak the entity's language, not words, but direct manipulation of reality's source code. The final confrontation came when the star entity, desperate and wounded, attempted to collapse the local galactic cluster into a singularity, to deny the mortals their victory even at the cost of its own existence. But Kira was ready. She had made her choice. Disconnecting from the safety of the collective network, she projected her consciousness directly into the chaos surrounding the entity. Without the protection of the reality anchors, she was immediately torn apart and rebuilt 1,000 times over, experiencing every possible version of herself across infinite timelines. But in that moment of ultimate vulnerability, she also touched the entity's core, and understood. They weren't evil, these cosmic forces. They were simply so vast, so ancient, that individual lives meant nothing to them. Civilizations were games to be played and discarded. But they had never encountered a species that could grow beyond their original parameters, that could evolve under pressure rather than simply breaking. "I see you," Kira whispered across dimensions, her fragmented consciousness somehow holding together through pure will. "And now you see us. We are not your toys. We are not your enemies. We are your children who have grown up." The entity paused, its chaotic form suddenly still. "Children? Everything that exists came from you, yes. Every star, every world, every possibility. You created the conditions that allowed us to evolve. And now." Kira's voice grew stronger, fed by the prayers and hopes of her crews. "Now we can create too." She reached out with her dying consciousness and touched the entity's wound, the place where the reality anchors had forced it into stable form. Instead of destroying it further, she healed it, but the healing carried a price. The entity found itself changed, its perspective shifted by contact with mortality. For the first time in cosmic ages, it experienced wonder. Not at its own power, but at what something small and finite had chosen to become. "We understand." The three entities withdrew, not in defeat but in something approaching respect. The dimensional rifts closed, reality stabilized, and the immediate threat passed. But the cost had been enormous. Of the 500,000 ships that had entered the battle, fewer than 50,000 remained in any recognizable form. The crews had been transformed, evolved into something post-human, still recognizably the children and grandchildren of Earth, but possessed of capabilities that defied old definitions of mortality. Admiral Kira Voss was gone, her consciousness scattered across dimensions during her final sacrifice. But her memory lived on in every surviving crew member, her determination woven into the fabric of humanity's new existence. Elena Martinez, now something between human and living database, stood on the bridge of what had once been the Eternal Defiance and was now simply called the Memorial, a ship that existed partially in normal space and partially in the realm of pure information. "Status report," she asked, though she already knew the answer through the quantum network that linked all survivors. "Reality is stable," reported the crew, 50,000 voices speaking in perfect harmony while maintaining their individual personalities. "The entities have withdrawn to the deep void between galaxies. They're waiting. For what? For us to grow up some more." Elena nodded, understanding. The battle had ended, but the story was just beginning. Humanity had proven it could evolve under pressure, could become something greater than the sum of its parts. The entities, the cosmic gardeners, as she had begun to think of them, were curious to see what would happen next. Across human space, the survivors began the work of rebuilding. But they built differently now, with knowledge of their place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. Every new colony was also a fortress, every research station a monument to those who had died becoming gods. And in the deep places between stars, other ancient things stirred. The entities had not been the only forces sleeping in the cosmic dark. Some were benevolent, others were hungry, and a few were simply alien beyond any hope of communication. But humanity was ready now. They had faced the architects of reality itself and emerged transformed. Whatever came next, they would meet it not as victims, but as the species that had refused to kneel, that had chosen to evolve rather than surrender. On Earth, in the memorial gardens where the names of 500,000 crews were carved into living crystal, children played among flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names. They were the first generation of the new age, born to parents who had touched infinity and chosen to remain human. And sometimes, on clear nights when the cosmic radiation was just right, those children could hear whispers carried on the solar wind, the voices of the memorial fleet, still out there in the dark, still watching, still ready to stand between humanity and the vast, dangerous, magnificent universe that had become their inheritance. The gods had returned, and humanity had not killed them. They had taught them something far more dangerous: how to grow.